I don't know many of you personally, but I consider you all my friends. So hello, my friends, my new friends. I wrote something that I'd like to read about Roger and I. So, oh, feedback. Is this better? What was Roger like? We all know what Roger was like. He wasn't like anything or anyone. He was always just Roger. Unique, loving, funny, smart, musical, argumentative, empathetic, but most of all, singular in his own way. Roger was my alter ego, but I didn't know it until I had hired him in the late 60s at the Paradox restaurant in New York City. Roger and Marta had left The Hague, traveled to Dixon, found what they were looking for, land to build for a family compound, and then traveled on to the city to round up the money they needed to buy it. It was at the Paradox that Loudon Wainwright wrote a song that highlighted both Roger and Marta, called Bruno's Cafe, with the following lyrics that I can't emulate as well as Loudon Wainwright, but yes, and Marta please, while Roger needs the bread he's baking, the girls he's taking, he's worried. I really don't know what he was worried about, unless it was what Marta might think. On the other hand, around the same time, I dreamt of leaving the city and traveling the coast of California, starting life anew, although the actual course of my life was to remain in the city. When I first met Roger and Marta, I saw the sparkle in his eye that also held his sense of humor, his fresh energy, and his intelligence. I enjoyed and envied his free and easy warmth. Over the last 50 years, my friendship with Roger and Marta continued to grow in spurts as I watched him hold up the banner for staying true to his early intentions throughout his life. To me, that commitment is what made Roger, Roger. Always unique. Thank you, my friends.
Marta has been a grandmother to my children, and they'll tell you themselves,
Some of these people,
3 or 4 people who shaped their lives, Marta was one of them.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ron Walker. I know that most of you don't know me, but I live in the Tucson area, and I'm the nephew of a man by the name of Dale Walker, who was one of Roger's best friends for most of his life. My Uncle Dale passed away at age 85 this past March, within just a year or so of Roger's passing. And they're only about a year or so apart in age. They met in San Francisco around 1960, I believe, and they remained great friends for the rest of their lives. Through Dale, myself, and many of my other family members became good friends with Roger and Marta over the years as well. In fact, the very first time I met Roger and Marta was in 1963, when they visited my family in Madrid, Spain, while they were traveling around Europe that year. That was a trip that they took down to Morocco and all that. They stopped by Madrid and stopped visiting my family shortly after Dale was there. Anyway, I was only 11 years old at that time, but their visit left a deep and lasting impression on my young mind. And over the decades, Roger and Marta became almost like family, since they were often visit or attend our family reunions that we had in Tucson over the years. And so the rest of my extended family got to know them as well. My father, John Walker, had 4 brothers, my uncles, and they all remained very close during their entire lives, except for my Uncle Jack, who was Republican. If you knew Dale or Roger, you know why Jack didn't fit in. Anyway, at these walking reunions we had, we all got to know Roger and Marta as well, along with their wives, their children, my cousins, my brothers, my dad's brothers, my uncle's children, my cousins. And Roger was considered almost a member of the family at these reunions. And in a way, I considered him to be another one of my uncles. As I said, Roger was closest to my Uncle Dale, but he got to be good friends with my Uncle Herbert, his family, and my dad also. Dale used to take the Amtrak train from Hoboken, New Jersey, where he lived, all the way to Dixon and back every fall in order to purchase a quarter-pound of weed from Roger, and that would be enough to last him until the following fall when he'd take the trip again. Over the years, I've driven here to Dixon from Tucson several times to visit Roger and Marta, and I've always felt welcome and always had a great time visiting and getting to know these two wonderful people better. And a few years ago, I was honored to have Roger visit me in my home in Oracle, Arizona, along with his friend Howard, and I got a chance to show him around my town and spend some time with him in my home instead of the other way around as usually was. The last time I spent time with Roger here in Dixon was a few years ago when my wife Marilyn and I took a trip to Colorado. We stopped and spent some time here. I remember we spent the entire afternoon, just the two of us, while Marta was showing Marilyn around the garden, and we sat on his porch talking about everything under the sun, and then some. I got a chance to pick his brains I never could before. And I told him that with all these great stories he had in his head, that he ought to write a book about them. But he told me he didn't have the patience or the ability to write a book or to sit in front of a typewriter for that long trying to put his thoughts on paper. Then I told him about a computer program that enables one to speak into a microphone and words appear on the screen and then onto paper with a printer. He said he didn't think he had the computer skills to be able to handle something like that, which is probably true. Because I think the only time you ever got on a computer was to order new movies delivered from Netflix. Dale's wife, my Aunt Ruth, loved Roger as well. When I wrote her recently and told her I was taking this trip here to speak and to honor Roger's life, she sent me a letter back asking if I would read a few words from her, since she couldn't make it out here today. Here are her words. Oh, Roger, listen to the story he told and is now kept in the Santa Fe Museum with others that settled in New Mexico early on. His stories are endless, because wherever he was, his interest in people grew so that eventually his people knew each other and what they were all about. One phone conversation we had, I really thought I would mention a film called The Eagle Huntress from Mongolia. I thought he would know, being so far from this world. But he not only knew the film, he knew someone who was there. His stories would slide from one to another with details and names from 40 years back. I know the tone of his voice so well. He laughed a lot and usually sang me an old song. One visit, Roger took me and my friend David up the road to say hi to someone and to smoke. Half an hour later, Roger drove home about 2.5 miles per hour, laughing and talking all the way. Roger got something to eat, and I had a great memory. His enthusiasm was boundless, not argumentative, but he just liked to mix it up. Years ago, he would talk so much that spit would settle on the conversation. My father, this is Ruth's father, was saying, "You've got to hand it to him for accomplishing what he set off to do. To have his own place, grow his own food, and be his own man." And he was. I never knew him to criticize, and that says a lot. That's from my Aunt Ruth. Also, Roger and Marta would often visit Dale and his family in Hoboken, New Jersey. And Dale's two children, my cousins Caitlin and Aaron, got to know him very well, and they were treated like families all around. The love between these two families was deep and boundless. I also told my brother Johnny, who now lives in Oceanside, California, about my plans to come here, and he asked me to speak on his behalf as well. So here are his words. The first time I met Roger and Marta was in Madrid when they stayed with our family. They were backpacking in Europe, experienced the cultures and languages of foreign lands, which caught my imagination for travel adventures. His stories made quite an impression on my young 1960s teenage mind. Many years ago, I learned that my Uncle Dale and Roger were lifelong friends and shared similar lifestyles, such as the joy of conversation over a few beers and some smoke. I really got to know Roger better at our family reunions in Tucson. He showed his wisdom for life in his music, good food, family, and all the things that really matter. I got the impression of an old soul about him. My only wish is that I could have had more time to pick his brain to understand his knowledge and the kindness of a good-hearted man who had so much to offer to all of us. But my memories will be with me forever, and I'm grateful and thankful to have known him. With deep love, John Walker, Jr. Actually, the third, because my dad was Jr. Thanks, Johnny. One more paragraph, folks. Bear with me. Over the decades, ever since I first met him as a kid, Roger has always stood for something special and unique in my mind. Like no other person I've ever met in my life. There's something about his independent spirit and his refusal to conform to society's or anyone's standards or expectations that I admired and respected so much. He lived his own life on his own terms, and he did so quite successfully, I might add. He lived a wonderful life, full of adventure and love. He raised a wonderful family and left the world with not only his children in it, but with his grandchildren as well. And he left the world a better place for having lived in it. And that's about all any man can hope for. Roger will always hold a special place in my heart. I'm a better person for knowing him, and I will miss him dearly. Thanks, Roger, for everything, and then some. Peace out, my old friend. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you very much. I love Roger, folks. I loved him like an uncle. He was so dear to me. Just a while ago, I went up here to the merch table, I guess, to look at some of his clothes, and I saw an old baseball hat, a white one with a red dot on it. And I started crying. I said, that's the hat I used to see him wear. So I asked Martha if I could have it, and she gave it to me, so it makes me happy. Thank you.
Hope it's half as much fun for you as it is for us.
Hi, I'm Roger Chilton, the oldest hippie in Dixon, and also the first. And having lived at New Buffalo, the commune that everybody knows about before that. Anyway, about 1972, me and John Carlisle made a trip to Espanola, a typical trip we do every couple of weeks to buy dog food and some beer and whatever. And then back in those days, not everybody had his own vehicle, and we shared vehicles, and we went to town jointly and so forth. And in this case, I was driving the state vehicle, the 1949 Chevrolet, which was ubiquitous. They were all over the place. Chevrolet pickup truck, half-ton. And we had been in Espanola. It was a nice afternoon in summer. And we had our bags and our groceries and our couple of six-packs of beer. And I want to mention that back in the old hippie days, this is worth pointing out, hippies hardly drank at all. It was mostly psychedelics, as everyone probably knows, and almost looked down upon people who drank. But I was with John Carlisle, and he was one of the first alcoholics I'd ever hung out with and realized that he was an alcoholic. And anyway, we were driving out of Espanola, speaking of alcoholics, and as we're leaving, I started to say we were approaching the last light, but in those days there was only one light in Espanola, and we were on the edge of town heading up for Dixon again. And there was a man hitchhiking by the side of the road, and I somehow was able to recognize this man as a Taos Indian, because I had lived in New Buffalo near Taos, and we'd associated with the Indians there quite a bit. And he didn't have a blanket, but he just somehow struck me as a Taos Indian. I put on the brakes, I stopped. He got in the vehicle between John and I, and we immediately realized he was pretty drunk. And the fact was that he had been on a program where part of the rehabilitation of alcoholics was to teach them some trade out El Rito. There was a school there, and they drove him there in a school bus from Taos Pueblo along with many other people. And on the way back, coming through Espanola, he jumped bus and went out and got himself drunk and had no ride home. So we picked him up, and we're driving up the highway toward Dixon. We started drinking. He happened to have a little bottle, a half pint, I believe it was, of blueberry brandy or blackberry brandy. It was kind of a conventional little drink that people would chase down real quick. I don't know why. And we drank that, and then we stopped the vehicle and got our beers out of the back, and pretty soon we were all drunk driving up the road. And I want to mention that driving drunk, I still believe, is one of the great pleasures of life, but you don't want to overdo it, of course. But we were having a very nice time partying, you might say, driving along. And when we got to the Dixon turnoff, we just looked at each other and said, what the hell, let's take this guy all the way into the Taos Pueblo. So we drove the next 25 miles up to Taos, sobering up slightly on the way. And we arrived at the Taos Pueblo, where I had been a number of times before, having lived at New Buffalo, etc., and having advice from the Indians. We knew them pretty well. But it was the first time I'd ever been there at night. And it was very dark, and I don't remember if they had gotten their electricity there at that time yet or not. This Indian fellow invited us up to his apartment. He almost insisted that we come up. So we went up 1 or 2 flights of stairs in the dark. We got to his place, and John and I were worried that the man's wife would berate us and blame us for getting him off the wagon, and we didn't know what to expect, but he was insisting, and so we went in. And it turned out to be exactly the opposite of what we had expected. They were extremely welcoming, sincere, hospitable. We had a little bit to eat. There was his wife and 2 older teenage daughters, it seemed like. And we had a very nice little conversation for half an hour or so, and they made no accusations, and they were absolutely thrilled that we had brought him home. And when we were about to leave, the man went into another dark room. The place was lit with a kerosene lamp, very little furniture, all adobe colored, bancos, etc. to sit on. And he came out from the other room with a little black pot in his hand, which at the time I didn't recognize was a seed pot, and also a big ear of blue dried corn. And he handed it to me as a gift, and instructed me to plant 1 seed per hole, 1 in a hole. Well, I'd grown corn for the last year or 2, and I'd always followed my wife's axiom, which is 4 seeds per hole, 1 for the worm, 1 for the crow, 1 to thin, and 1 to grow. But I took the seeds and planted them in the ground, and sure enough, as the man said, it was about 100% germination. I proceeded to grow that same strain of blue corn for about 10 years, and it started to lose its identity and became kind of coppery colored, very beautiful, but I somehow didn't want copper colored corn, and I stopped growing it. And later I got a couple more ears from a couple of fellows who grew it ritually, not so much for a crop, but just to keep it going, some corn that they had gotten from some Hopis. And they gave me 2 ears of that. And I've been growing that for about 20 years, and I'm still growing it. It's maintained its identity. And I eat it for breakfast in a form of atole, which is like hippie-style atole. Instead of milk and sugar, it's savory with chili, corn, and beans. And tamari and gamazio with it too, and I love it, and I must have had it, I've tried to do the math on it, probably about 6,000 times for breakfast now, since I do it about at least 300 a year. But anyway, I don't sell it. I sometimes give it to friends, but I just grow it sort of as a hobby and as a mainstay. Just a week or so ago, a Taos Indian asked me if I had any blue corn. She knew that I grew it. I was a friend of hers. And she was having a peyote meeting for her brother who had recently gotten out of the hospital. And as many of you know, when the meeting ends at dawn, people step out of the teepee, and the women have usually prepared a little dish of 3 different materials, 1 fruit and 1 meat, and 1 of roasted ground blue corn, which you just take a pinch of. This is only a symbolic meal. The real meal follows later. And so I gave that quart of the blue corn to Rose to have at a peyote meeting at the Taos Pueblo, and I guess that just about wraps up my story, beginning and ending at the Taos Pueblo.
Thank you.